Davis smiled softly as he welcomed everyone back. He invited listeners to pour a warm cup of tea, or coffee, whatever comfort they prefer tonight. He asked, gently, "Where are you listening from?" He spoke of this little community, how every voice, every home feels connected here. Then his tone shifted, just a touch. "Tonight's mystery begins by the sea," he whispered. And before the story even started, Miss Marple sensed something was wrong. Miss Marple arrived at the Seaside Pavilion with Mrs. Helena Brookfield. The evening was calm. The air was cool. The sea breeze moved quietly across the wooden boards. Small lights glowed around the entrance. Soft sounds came from inside. Musicians were tuning their instruments in short, careful bursts. Nothing loud. Nothing rushed. Just a gentle mix of notes. Helena walked slowly beside her. She carried her small handbag close to her arm. She looked pleased to be here. "It has been restored so nicely," she said. Miss Marple nodded. She agreed. The place did look fresh. New paint, new railings, new chairs lined in rows. Adrian Colfax stood near the entrance. He was the owner. He looked proud of himself. He greeted guests with short smiles. Miss Marple observed the stiffness in his posture. He seemed confident, but he also seemed tense. His eyes kept moving around the pavilion, as if he expected something to go wrong. A few steps away, Maestro Enzo Bellamare spoke with two musicians. He held his baton lightly. His voice was smooth. Miss Marple noticed the way he adjusted his cuffs twice in a row. A small habit, a small sign of nerves. He looked like a man trying to stay calm. Lila Travers stood beside the music stands. She held her cello case carefully. She kept checking the latches, then checked them again. Miss Marple noticed this small movement. It told her the young woman was anxious. Lila smiled when Helena waved to her, but the smile faded quickly. Victor Halden appeared near the corner of the stage. He wore a sharp suit. He did not smile. He watched Adrian Colfax with steady eyes. The tension was mild but clear. Adrian avoided his gaze. Victor did not look away. Miss Marple observed both men. She saw irritation in Victor's stance. She saw pressure in Adrian's shoulders. Nothing was said, but the two men were not at ease with each other. Nora Plimpton, the electrician, walked past them. She carried a small toolbox. Her steps were firm. She checked wires along the side wall. She nodded to Miss Marple politely. Her face was calm, but her movements were quick. She seemed to be working against time. She tightened a screw, then another. Then she moved toward the back of the stage. Miss Marple took in these details silently. She always did. Every small action meant something. Every small tension told a story. Helena, meanwhile, fanned herself lightly and looked toward the sea. "It all feels so lively," she said. Miss Marple smiled. "Yes, though I do notice a few unusual things." Helena raised an eyebrow. "Oh, such as?" Miss Marple shook her head softly. "Nothing important yet." Then she saw it. A cable, a long one, coiled behind the stage in a strange way. Not neat, not intentional, just dropped there, left uneven, left careless. Nora had not touched it. Adrian had walked past it. Victor had glanced at it once, but no one claimed it. No one adjusted it. Miss Marple stepped a little closer. She studied it for a moment. Something about it felt wrong. Not dangerous yet, just out of place. She looked toward the stage again. People moved normally. Voices were light. Music was soft. But the cable stayed where it was. And Miss Marple wondered, who left that cable like that? Miss Marple moved a little closer to the seating area. Guests were settling in. Voices floated around her in small clusters. Calm voices. Polite voices. But the words carried hints of concern. Two ladies near the aisle whispered about the pavilion's earlier repairs. One mentioned loose wires. The other mentioned delays. Both used careful tones. They did not want to alarm anyone. Miss Marple listened quietly. She always did. A young man behind her spoke about Maestro Enzo Bellamare. He said the maestro had argued with someone during rehearsal. He did not know who. He only heard raised voices. He called it a quick disagreement. Miss Marple noted that phrase. It often meant more than it revealed. Lila Travers approached slowly. She carried her cello case again. She stopped beside Miss Marple. Her breath was a little unsteady. Her hands held the case straps too tightly. "Miss Marple," she said softly, "I keep thinking about something strange." Miss Marple looked at her gently. "What is troubling you, my dear?" Lila glanced toward the stage, then toward the back corner where instrument cases were kept. "I saw someone near the cases earlier," she whispered. "Someone crouching." Miss Marple asked, "Did you see who it was?" Lila shook her head. "It was too quick. But they moved as soon as I looked their way, and I kept checking my case after that." Miss Marple nodded. "That was wise." Lila's voice lowered. "It made me uneasy." Miss Marple told her to keep close to the stage area. Lila nodded and stepped away. Victor Holden walked past them. He did not greet anyone. He looked directly at Adrian Colfax. There was no warmth in that look, no friendliness. Victor's jaw tightened slightly. He tapped his fingers against his coat pocket. Miss Marple noticed the small, sharp rhythm of the tapping. It matched irritation, or frustration, or both. Adrian avoided his gaze again. He pretended to study the stage layout, but his eyes kept shifting toward Victor. Miss Marple observed their silent exchange. She saw pride in one man and resentment in the other. That combination rarely led to peace. Nora Plimpton walked by next. She held her toolbox close. She did not speak. Her steps were steady, but her eyes told another story. They kept moving toward the wiring along the side wall, then toward the back corner of the stage, then toward the rafters. Nora paused beside a junction box. She placed her hand on the metal surface. She waited for a second, then she stepped back, almost too quickly. Miss Marple took note of that movement. A small group of guests laughed nearby. Light laughter, harmless enough. The music tuning continued. Soft notes rose and fell. The atmosphere seemed cheerful from a distance, but Miss Marple sensed the edges of something else. She watched the people, their movements, their expressions, their small habits. She saw tension tucked behind smiles. She saw worry in quiet glances. Then she noticed something near the wall, a small marking on the floorboard. Light, barely visible, not part of the original wood. She bent slightly, as if adjusting her shawl. She looked at it carefully. She understood what it meant, but she kept it to herself. For now, the crowd grew louder. Music swelled again. Everything looked normal. Everything sounded pleasant. But something was building beneath the cheerful noise. The performance began with a gentle hush. Guests settled deeper into their seats. Instruments rested in place. The air felt calm. Miss Marple folded her hands neatly. She watched the stage with steady eyes. Maestro Enzo Bellamare stepped forward. He stood at the center. He gave a small nod to his musicians. Then he raised his baton. The motion was smooth, the kind he had done thousands of times. A soft breath passed through the room. The first notes rose, light, controlled, balanced. The music swelled slowly. Strings lifted the melody. Woodwinds joined in. A peaceful beginning. Everything seemed in order. Then it happened. Sudden. Sharp. A small blue spark flashed near the maestro's hand, so quick that half the audience missed it. But Miss Marple did not miss it. Her eyes moved directly to the point of light. The spark snapped. The sound was faint but real. Maestro Enzo's arm jerked. His baton trembled. He froze for half a second. Then he collapsed forward. His body dropped against the podium. The music stopped at once. A wave of confusion spread through the room. Chairs scraped. Voices rose. Someone gasped. Miss Marple stayed seated for a moment. She stayed still. Her eyes studied everything. The stage, the podium, the floor, the conductor's right hand. She did not rush. She observed. The smell reached her next. A faint smell of ozone. Unmistakable. It was the scent left behind after a small electric discharge. Not strong, but present. Miss Marple leaned slightly forward. Her expression stayed calm. People hurried toward the stage. A few musicians stepped aside. The audience whispered in tight, uneasy tones. Miss Marple rose from her seat and moved closer. Not too fast, not too slow, just enough to see. She saw scorch marks near the wooden edge of the podium, very small. Dark patches, almost hidden under the maestro's fallen coat. She also saw moisture, a narrow line of it, not spilled tea, not condensation, a thin trail that caught the light. Dr. Rowan Fitch arrived. He knelt beside the maestro. He checked pulse, checked breathing. His voice was firm. "It's a heart attack," he said. Quick and sudden. People nodded. Some cried quietly. Inspector Dalton Reeves walked up the steps of the stage. He looked irritated by the commotion. "No foul play," he said quickly. "Let's not create panic." He waved his hand as if brushing the idea aside. He did not look at the scorch marks. He did not look at the moisture. He only looked at the crowd. Miss Marple lowered her gaze to the area near the maestro's feet. Something was missing. A small object usually kept near the podium. She had seen it earlier. Now it was gone. She knew that was important. The audience continued murmuring. Musicians stood stiffly in a circle. The inspector kept assuring everyone. Dr. Fitch prepared to have the body moved. Miss Marple stepped back. She let the information settle. She had seen the spark. She had smelled the ozone. She had noted the missing item. And she had watched the inspector ignore the clues. Miss Marple knew this was no ordinary collapse. The morning came in quietly. Grey clouds covered the sky. Light rain touched the seaside path in soft, steady drops. The sound was gentle. Miss Marple stepped outside before most people had risen. She often preferred mornings like this. Calm, unhurried, clear enough for thinking. She walked toward the pavilion. The boards were still damp. The railing carried small beads of rain. Nothing harsh, nothing stormy. Just a wet, muted start to the day. Miss Marple reached the main walkway. She paused. She looked across the sand. It was pale here, light in color, fine in texture. She noticed footprints from last night had blurred. Rain had softened their edges, but shapes still remained. Then she saw movement near the instrument doors. Lila Travers stood there. She struggled with her cello case again. Her hands shook slightly as she worked the latch. Miss Marple approached her slowly. "Are you all right, my dear?" she asked. Lila looked up. She tried to smile but failed. I don't think so," she whispered. She opened the case fully. Inside, near the bottom lining, patches of dark sand were visible. Not pale sand, not the sand of the local beach. This was different, coarser, heavier, almost black. Miss Marple leaned closer. She touched it lightly with her fingertip. "This is not from here," Miss Marple said softly. Lila nodded. "I cleaned the case yesterday," she said, "and it was empty. Then," she swallowed. "Someone opened it during the interval. I know someone did." Miss Marple asked gently, "You mentioned seeing someone near the cases last night?" Lila nodded again. "Yes, someone crouching. I saw a shadow. I thought it was a stagehand. But when I looked again, the person moved away." She paused. They were quick. Too quick. Miss Marple folded her hands in front of her. She looked toward the underside of the pavilion. The pavilion stood on old wooden supports. Below it, the ground was covered in dark sand, the kind washed up from the deeper end of the bay, the kind that stayed packed and firm, the kind that did not match the light sand near the walkway. Miss Marple looked from the dark sand to the sand in Lila's case, then back again. A simple line formed in her mind. Clear, logical. Someone had handled the case after being under the pavilion. Someone who had stepped into that darker sand. Someone who knew where to stand without being seen. Lila hugged the case closer. Her shoulders trembled. Miss Marple rested a calming hand on her arm. "You have done nothing wrong," she said softly. Lila nodded but did not look reassured. She kept glancing toward the underside of the wooden structure. Her eyes held quiet fear. Miss Marple stepped near the railing. She studied the sand patterns below. She saw faint disturbances. Not many, but enough. Small marks where someone had knelt. Small impressions where something heavy had been placed. Clear shapes, clear logic. Rain continued to fall in a thin, steady line. Nothing loud, nothing distracting. Just enough to make footprints blur. Miss Marple lifted her head. She took in the morning air. Her thoughts connected piece by piece. Slowly, steadily, comfortably. Then she said it. Quietly, firmly. Someone was under the pavilion last night. The pavilion felt quiet in the morning light. Most people had not returned yet. Only a few stagehands moved about with slow steps. Miss Marple entered through the side door. She preferred to observe before the day grew busy. She walked along the rows of chairs. The wood was still slightly damp from the night. Everything smelled faintly of salt and rain. Nora Plimpton stood near the microphone stands. Her toolbox rested at her feet. She tested connections with short, careful touches. Miss Marple watched from a distance. Nora worked with steady hands, but her eyes looked tired. Her shoulders held tension. One microphone gave a low hum. A strange hum. Not soft, not harmless. Nora tapped the cable. The hum grew louder. A spark snapped near the metal rim. Moisture dripped from the connection point. Just one drop, but enough to show something was wrong. Nora pulled back quickly. She sighed. "This shouldn't happen," she muttered. Miss Marple stepped closer. "Is it damaged?" she asked calmly. Nora hesitated, then nodded. "It wasn't like this. Yesterday," she said. "Someone tampered with it." Her voice stayed low. Miss Marple listened carefully. "Who worked on it last?" she asked. Nora looked down at her toolbox. Her fingers tapped the lid lightly. "Someone asked me to adjust it before the second half," she said. "I thought it was a routine request." Miss Marple tilted her head. "Someone?" Nora nodded again. "They didn't give a name. They just said it needed a slight increase in sensitivity. I didn't think much of it." She swallowed. "But when I came back later, this was already wrong." Miss Marple leaned in to study the microphone. She saw a strip of tape, new tape. Not the old kind Nora used. It was cut unevenly. Someone working quickly. Someone trying to hide something. She noticed the rubber insulation. Cut, not torn. Cut cleanly, not by accident, by intention. Someone had sliced it open, then wrapped it back. Poorly. Miss Marple touched the moisture carefully. Her fingertip picked up a faint grain. Salt. Not the kind in the air. The stronger kind. The kind from seawater. She looked toward the side of the pavilion, toward the darker sand beneath it, toward the place she had studied earlier. Nora watched her. "Do you think it's connected?" she asked. Miss Marple did not answer right away. She took her time. She followed the cable with her eyes. She saw how it stretched toward the back of the stage. She saw where it disappeared behind a sound panel. She saw the small drag marks on the floor. Someone had moved it recently. Only a little, but enough. Nora stepped beside her. "I don't understand what happened," she whispered. "I adjusted only a minor setting. Nothing that should cause danger." Miss Marple nodded softly. "I believe you." Her voice stayed gentle. "But someone wanted more than a minor adjustment." The hum returned again. Low, unsteady, not natural, not safe. Miss Marple took one slow breath. Then she spoke. Calm, clear. This setup could kill a healthy person. The rain had slowed to a light drizzle. Miss Marple walked beside Inspector Dalton Reeves toward the back area of the pavilion. The new tar surface behind the building was still wet, fresh enough to record anything, soft enough to reveal small details. Miss Marple looked down first. She always did. The footprints were clear, clearer than the inspector expected. Heavy impressions. 2 sets. Both made last night, both entering the narrow path toward the switch-room door. Inspector Reeves frowned. He bent down slightly. The drizzle touched the brim of his hat. "These could be workers," he said. His tone lacked conviction. Miss Marple gave a small nod. "Possibly," she said softly. but workers usually wear lighter shoes for long repairs. She pointed at the first set of prints. Large, wide, evenly spaced, a neat pattern, consistent with heavy, formal shoes. She did not need to guess. Adrian Colfax wore those exact shoes last night. She remembered the polished toe, the slight squeak when he walked on the wooden boards. Inspector Reeves followed her gaze. He sighed. Adrian said he never came back here. Miss Marple kept her voice calm. People say many things, Inspector. Shoes rarely say anything untrue. They moved farther down the tar surface. The other set of footprints came into view. Narrower, sharper heels, a different tread. Miss Marple examined the edges. She touched the tar gently with her gloved hand. Not formal shoes, she said. Nautical ones, the kind used on wet decks. Victor Holden owned a small boat tied near the pier. He wore those shoes when he arrived. Miss Marple noticed them then. Most people had not. Inspector Reeves stood very still. He looked from one set of prints to the other. This puts both men here, he admitted. Miss Marple nodded again. Together, or at least in close sequence. She pointed at the faint indentations. These prints are fresh. The rain last night softened them, but not enough to erase the pattern. They followed the tracks toward the switch room door. The path narrowed. The wall drew closer. Both sets of footprints moved in the same direction. Side by side for several feet, then slightly apart. Then right up to the small step of the switch room. Miss Marple observed every step, every angle. She noticed the depth of the prints, the slight change in weight on the right foot of Adrian's set, the quick, sharp lift of Victor's. Signs of pace, signs of tension, signs of a short exchange. Inspector Reeves opened the switch room door. Nothing inside appeared disturbed now. Everything looked orderly. But Miss Marple did not look inside yet. She looked back at the tar. The footprints told the rest of the story. 2 sets entered, but only 1 set returned. The returning prints belonged to the heavy, formal shoes. Adrian's shoes. Victor's nautical prints ended at the door. No return pattern. No outward step. Nothing. Inspector Reeves straightened up. He finally looked troubled. "Where did Holden go?" he asked quietly. Miss Marple kept her eyes on the dark impressions. She let the silence hold for a moment. Then she lifted her head. Why did only 1 man walk back? Miss Marple walked slowly toward the front of the stage. The morning light showed the area more clearly. Nothing looked rushed now. Nothing looked crowded. The pavilion stood quiet, calm, still, but the details remained. She looked up at the lantern above the podium. It hung slightly to the left. Its frame was intact, but the glass bulb inside was missing, completely gone. Only the socket remained, bare, unprotected. The wires inside looked disturbed, not broken, just moved, shifted by someone with a purpose. Miss Marple raised her eyebrows. She stepped a bit closer. Her shoes made soft sounds on the wooden floor. She leaned in. The edges around the socket held a thin layer of residue, a dull grey ring. Not dust, not paint, something else. She did not touch it. She only noted it. Inspector Reeves arrived from the side aisle. He crossed his arms. He looked at the lantern. He looked puzzled. "It's just a bulb," he said. "Someone probably dropped it last night." Miss Marple smiled politely. "Possibly," she replied. Her voice stayed mild, but her thoughts moved quickly. She looked under the podium next. The area was darker, less visible, still damp from the rain. She bent down carefully. Something glinted beneath the wooden step. A small shape, round, glass. She reached gently. Her fingers brushed against broken pieces. A shattered bulb. The missing one. She picked it up with care. It still held part of its metal base. The metal was bent, twisted in a way that did not happen from a simple fall. Inspector Reeves stepped closer. "Let me see that," he said. Miss Marple held the bulb toward him. He looked at it quickly, then shrugged. "It's just broken." Miss Marple did not argue. Instead, she turned the glass slightly in her hand. The inside surface held a thin crust. Corrosion, a faint green tint. The kind formed by contact with salt and metal. She brushed the edge lightly. It left a small trace on her glove. Salt residue. Real salt. Not sea mist. Not common moisture. Stronger. More direct. Nora Plimpton appeared behind them. She carried her toolbox again. She saw the bulb and froze. Her eyes widened for a moment. Only a moment. But Miss Marple saw it. Nora stepped closer. "I didn't replace that bulb," she said quickly. "It was secure yesterday." Miss Marple nodded. "I believe you." Her tone was calm, reassuring, but her mind kept working. Someone had removed this bulb. Someone had tampered with the wires. Someone had used the lantern as part of a larger plan. Miss Marple examined the broken pieces again. She traced the cuts in the metal base. Clean lines. Not random damage. A tool had been used. A careful tool, not a careless hand. She took a slow breath. Every clue matched something she had already seen. The sliced rubber. The salty moisture. The electrical hum. The spark near the batten. Everything connected neatly, quietly, logically. She looked at Inspector Reeves. He still seemed unsure. He looked at the lantern again, then at the broken bulb, then at Miss Marple. Her voice came softly, but clear, firm. "This wasn't an accident," she said. She held the bulb with steady fingers. "Someone engineered this with precision." Mrs. Helena Brookfield sat near the front row. A small table had been set up for her. She placed a damp concert program on it. She looked puzzled. Miss Marple walked toward her with quiet steps. "Something worrying you, Helena?" she asked. Helena sighed. "This program was under my chair last night," she said. "It was wet this morning. I thought it was ruined. But something odd happened when it dried." Miss Marple leaned slightly closer. She watched Helena lift the program. The paper had wrinkled edges. Nothing unusual at first glance, but there was a faint discoloration on the inside page, a pale smudge, barely visible. "I thought it was nothing," Helena continued. "But when I held it near the kettle steam, something formed." She lifted a small kettle from beside the table. The steam curled upward in small, gentle waves. She held the program above it again. Miss Marple observed. Patient. Quiet. Shapes began to appear. Not ink at first. Just faint lines. Then clearer ones. Words. Hidden words. Helena gasped softly. "There, look." Miss Marple nodded. She saw each letter forming, darkening slowly, taking shape on the page. Invisible ink. Simple. Old-fashioned, but effective. The line finished forming. A sentence. Miss Marple read it carefully. "Fix the first interval, or he won't finish the concert." Helena placed her hand over her mouth. "That's a threat," she whispered. "A real threat." Miss Marple responded gently. "Yes, my dear, it is." Helena handed her the program. Miss Marple studied the handwriting. The loops, the slant, the pressure marks. She remembered Victor Holden signing a donation form earlier in the week. His script had the same lean, the same upward hook on the T, the same long tail on the R. Miss Marple lowered the program. "Helena," she said softly, "this message matches Victor Holden's writing." Helena's eyes widened. "But why would he threaten the maestro?" Miss Marple did not answer immediately. She looked toward the stage, toward the podium, toward the lantern with the missing bulb, toward the broken object she had found below. A threat during the first interval. But the maestro collapsed in the second half. Something did not match. The timing, the method, the placement. Inspector Reeves approached them. He saw the program. "What's this?" he asked. Helena hesitated. Miss Marple handed him the page before she spoke. "A message," she said. "A dangerous one, and hidden deliberately." Reeves squinted at the words. He was not pleased. "This complicates things," he muttered. Miss Marple remained calm. "It clarifies some things as well," she replied. Helena looked anxious. "Do you think Victor meant to harm him?" Miss Marple answered gently. "I think Victor wanted something, and he wanted it badly enough to threaten." She paused. But threats do not always match actions. She looked again at the words. The letters. The message. Then, at the stage, the timing mattered, the sequence mattered, and this message did not fit the moment of death. Helena spoke in a shaky voice, but the maestro died after the interval. Miss Marple closed the program slowly. Her eyes held steady understanding. Yes, she said, but the maestro died in the second half. The rehearsal room felt quiet. The windows let in a soft, dull light. Miss Marple stood beside a long wooden table. Several items from the stage had been placed there. Cables, sheets of music, small tools, and the maestro's baton. She reached for the baton gently. It felt light. Too light. She turned it slowly in her hand. The wood was smooth, but the balance was off. She tapped the tip against her palm. Hollow. That was her first impression. She tested again. Yes, hollow. Inspector Reeves watched her. He did not interrupt. He had learned to stay quiet when Miss Marple examined things. She unscrewed the small metal cap at the end. It came loose with a slight grind. Not a natural grind. A rushed one. Someone had tightened it without care. When the cap opened, a thin stream spilled onto the table. A mix of salt water and tiny metal filings. The water made a faint trail. The filings scattered in a dull line. Miss Marple stepped back slightly. She observed the color, the texture, the way the filings clung together. Inspector Reeves leaned in. "What is that?" he asked. His voice was low. Miss Marple answered softly. "Conductive material, used to carry a charge." Reeves frowned. "Inside a baton?" "Yes," she said. "It would allow a current to move through the handle, directly into the hand that held it." Reeves stiffened. "That spark we saw?" Miss Marple nodded. "And the scorch marks," she added quietly. She placed the baton on the table again. She looked at the wood grain. There were faint darkened lines near the grip. Not burns, but heat marks. Very small, very controlled. She turned the metal cap in her fingers. The inside had corrosion. The same green tint she saw on the broken lantern bulb. The same pattern she saw near the microphone wiring. All connected. All part of one mechanism. The baton had been tampered with. Not by chance. Not by accident. Reeves shook his head. "I don't understand how he didn't notice," Miss Marple replied gently. The weight change was small, barely noticeable during a busy performance, and the conductor often holds the baton with practiced trust. A familiar object can hide danger very well. She looked again at the spilled mixture. Salt water. Metal. Both part of an intentional design, both perfect for a controlled electric discharge. She recalled the spark, the sudden collapse, the smell of ozone. Everything matched. She picked up the baton once more. She rolled it gently between her fingers. Her mind traced the sequence. The timing. The opportunity. Someone had opened the baton. Someone had filled it. Someone had placed the cap back in a hurry. She rested the baton on the table again. Her expression stayed calm, thoughtful, focused. She looked at Inspector Reeves. "This was the murder device," she said softly. "The man did not die by chance. He died by design." Reeves stared at the table. He said nothing. He didn't need to. Miss Marple touched the metal cap one last time. She let the silence settle. Then she spoke the question that mattered most. But who filled the baton? And when? Inspector Dalton Reeves stood in the small meeting room. The door was closed. The windows were shut. Only a soft hum filled the air. Adrian Colfax stood on one side. Victor Holden stood on the other. Both men looked tense. Miss Marple waited quietly in the corner. Reeves crossed his arms. He stared at Adrian first. "You told me you never went near the switch room," he said. Adrian lifted his chin. "That is correct," he replied. But his voice lacked firmness. Reeves placed a photograph on the table. Footprints. Clear ones. Adrian's face changed. Only slightly. But enough for Miss Marple to notice. "You were there," Reeves said. "You walked straight to that door." Adrian hesitated. "I checked something earlier. That is all. Nothing important." Reeves did not believe him. Miss Marple knew that. She also knew Adrian was holding something back. His fingers tapped the edge of the table. A nervous habit. Reeves turned to Victor Halden. "You also went to the switch room," he said. Victor sighed. "Yes, I walked there, but not for anything secret." His tone was defensive. Too defensive. Miss Marple watched his posture. His shoulders leaned forward. His jaw remained tight. Reeves placed another photograph. This one showed the nautical footprints. "Your prints end at the door," Reeves said. "Yet you claim you left right away." Victor looked away. "Maybe the rain erased them." Reeves shook his head. "The rain was strong later. Not then. Your prints should show." Victor pressed his lips together. He had no easy answer. Nora Plimpton entered the room. She held her toolbox at her side. Reeves nodded for her to come in. "Nora," he said, "did you handle the maestro's baton at any time?" Nora shook her head quickly. "No, I only work with sound equipment, not instruments." Her voice stayed steady, but her eyes flicked toward Adrian for a moment. Miss Marple caught it. Reeves asked, "Did either of these men ask you to fix the microphones before the second half?" Nora hesitated. "Yes," she said softly. "One of them did." Adrian and Victor both stiffened. Reeves stepped closer. "Which one?" Nora tightened her grip on her toolbox. "I don't remember," she said. But Miss Marple knew that was not true. Nora remembered perfectly. She simply was not ready to speak. Reeves exhaled sharply. He looked between the three of them. "One of you had access," he said. "One of you interfered with the equipment." Silence settled. Heavy silence. Nobody moved. Miss Marple observed the room quietly. She watched hands, eyes, breathing. She saw small signs, Adrian rubbing his thumb, Victor avoiding Nora's gaze, Nora pressing her lips into a thin line. Lies revealed themselves in tiny ways, not in grand gestures. Reeves grew impatient. "I want the truth now," he said, but none of the three offered it. Miss Marple stepped forward gently. Her voice remained calm. "Inspector," she said, "the truth is close, very close." Reeves turned toward her. He waited. Miss Marple looked at each person slowly, thoughtfully. She saw fear. She saw guilt. She saw calculation. Then she spoke softly, but clearly. One of them was still hiding something crucial. Miss Marple walked alone toward the pavilion. The afternoon had grown quiet. Most people had gone home. Only the sound of the light breeze touched the wooden boards. She stepped carefully down the small side path. Then beneath the structure, the space was dim but calm. The smell of damp wood sat in the air. Her shoes made soft sounds on the packed sand. Dark sand, not like the sand near the walkway. This was heavier, firmer. She paused. She studied the ground. Footprints were faint, but still there. Marks from last night's visitor. Miss Marple moved slowly. Her eyes traced the pattern. Foot pressure, direction, depth. Someone had walked here with purpose. Someone who knew exactly where to step. She reached one of the wooden support beams. A small scrape caught her attention. Fresh, clean, not weathered. The wood had been scratched by something metal. Not an accident. Something had been pushed or dragged here. She bent slightly. Her hand brushed the sand near the base of the beam. Nothing. But a few steps farther, she noticed another mark. A straight line. Sharp. Recent. As though someone had knelt and turned an object on the ground. She followed the faint disturbance. A tiny glint appeared beside a stone. Miss Marple bent again. She lifted the object carefully. A metal shard. Very small. Almost invisible unless one looked closely. She turned it between her fingers. It had threading along one side. Fine threading. Meant for a narrow opening. She recognized it instantly. This piece belonged to the maestro's baton. The threading matched the cap she had opened earlier. It was identical in cut, in shape, in worn texture. Someone had unscrewed the cap. Someone had over-tightened it afterward. That explained the rough grind when she opened it. This shard had broken off in the process and fallen here, under the pavilion. Not on stage, not near the podium, underneath. Miss Marple looked around the support beams again. If the batten had been opened below, then the person knew this place well. They knew how to move quietly. They knew where not to be seen. They knew how to avoid the light. She stood slowly. Her hand rested on one of the beams. She felt the smooth side, then the fresh scrape again. The height matched someone kneeling, someone working quickly, someone aware of time. Miss Marple took a few steps back. She looked at the structure as a whole. The underside was sheltered enough for someone to work unnoticed, just long enough, just quiet enough, and the interval had offered that exact window. People chatting, people walking, people distracted. She closed her hand around the metal shard. One small piece, but enough to confirm the truth. Someone had opened the batten here, not earlier, not later, here, during the interval. And not by a stranger, not by someone unfamiliar with the place. This had been done by someone who knew the layout, someone who moved confidently, someone the maestro trusted. Miss Marple looked toward the steps that led back up to the stage. The conclusion settled gently in her mind. Clear, simple, logical. It happened during the interval, by someone trusted. Night settled slowly over the seaside. The air cooled, the waves softened. The pavilion stood in a quiet line of shadows. Most lights were off now. Only a few dim bulbs glowed near the entrance. Miss Marple walked toward the back path with Sergeant Collins beside her. He carried a small flashlight. She carried nothing. She preferred to observe with her own eyes. Her steps were steady, calm, measured. They stopped near the side steps. The tide was beginning to rise. The water touched the lower posts with gentle pressure. Not loud, just a soft, steady rhythm. Collins whispered, "Are you certain they will return tonight?" Miss Marple nodded. "Yes. People who hide things often come back to check them." Her voice was low. Matter of fact, comfortable. They positioned themselves behind a stack of wooden crates. The crates hid them well enough. The space gave them a clear view of the underside of the pavilion. Miss Marple watched the sand carefully. It looked still, untouched since her earlier visit. But she knew better. Collins adjusted the flashlight again. She tapped his hand lightly. "No light yet," she said softly. "Let the dark do the work." He nodded. He understood. Minutes passed. Quiet minutes. Only the sound of the tide rising. Only the distant hum of a late boat returning to harbour. Miss Marple leaned slightly forward. Her shawl brushed against the crate. She did not speak. Her focus remained on the ground. Then she heard it. A soft scrape. Not metal this time. Shoes. Someone stepping onto the sand. A careful step. A slow one. Collins stiffened. She placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Wait," she whispered. A faint outline appeared near the left post. A person, moving low, moving with purpose. A shadow slid across the sand. The figure crouched, then crawled under the structure. Not rushed, not fearful, comfortable enough to take their time. Miss Marple recognized the movement, the confidence, the familiarity with the space. She leaned closer, not enough to be seen, but enough to understand the pattern. The figure opened a small bag. Tools glimmered faintly as the tide's reflection caught them. Metal shapes, thin wires, something small like a screwdriver. The person reached toward the same beam she had examined earlier, the same spot with the fresh scrape, the same area where the batten cap had been replaced. Collins whispered, "Should we move now?" Miss Marple shook her head. "Not yet. Let them show what they came for." Her voice stayed controlled. No fear, no rush. The shadow shifted again. The tools made soft clicks. The figure pressed something into the sand, then adjusted another piece of wiring. Everything was deliberate, planned, practiced. Miss Marple focused on the ground beneath the intruder. She saw the way the sand moved under their knees. The dark sand. The same that appeared in Lila's cello case. The same that marked the hidden trail under the pavilion. The intruder leaned farther under the structure. Miss Marple exhaled slowly. A quiet breath, a steady one. A shadow moved exactly where the sand came from. The shadow moved again under the pavilion. The tide rose slowly around the wooden posts. Miss Marple watched every motion with steady eyes. Sergeant Collins held his breath. Neither of them spoke. The figure's hands worked quickly, too quickly for someone innocent. Collins shifted forward. Miss Marple gave a small nod. The signal was enough. They stepped out from behind the crates. Collins shined the flashlight directly at the figure. The beam caught a familiar face. Nora Plimpton froze. Her hand still hovered over the wires. Her small toolbox sat open beside her. The tools inside glimmered in the light. She blinked rapidly. She did not run. She did not shout. She simply lowered her head. Collins spoke first. "What are you doing down here?" His tone was firm. Nora swallowed. She rubbed her palms against her trousers. Then she stood up slowly. The sand clung to her knees. "I wasn't trying to hide," she said. Her voice sounded tired, flat, defeated. Miss Marple looked at her kindly. "You were adjusting the wires," she said softly. Nora nodded once. "Yes, I needed to check them. I needed to see if someone changed them again." Collins frowned. "Again?" Nora looked toward the steps above her. "I made changes before the concert," she said. "Small adjustments. Nothing dangerous. Just enough to cause a short delay. Not harm." Miss Marple folded her hands. "You were paid," she said gently. Nora's eyes filled with shame. "Yes, I was paid to sabotage. Nothing more. Just enough to embarrass Adrian Colfax. Or frustrate him. I don't know." Collins stepped closer. "Who paid you?" Nora hesitated. Her gaze shifted to the sand. "To create a fault," she whispered. "Not to kill. Never to. Kill." Miss Marple remained still. "What exactly did you change?" she asked. Nora pointed to the cables running along the support beams. "I loosened one connection," she said. "Just slightly. Enough to cause a flicker. Enough to break sound for a moment." She sighed. "But when I returned later, the setup was wrong. Very wrong." Miss Marple nodded softly. "You noticed the new tape," she said. "And the cut rubber." Nora closed her eyes. "Yes. Someone altered my work. Someone added more wiring. Someone filled the batten with that mixture. I never touched the batten. I only made the small fault I was paid for." Collins crossed his arms. "So you tampered first," he said. "But someone made it lethal afterward." Nora looked up at him with tired eyes. "That's the truth," she said. "I didn't want this. I didn't want a man to die." Miss Marple believed her. The tone was honest. The guilt was real. Nora pointed at the wires again. "I came back tonight to make sure nothing else could happen. I thought if I fixed it quietly, no one would know my part. I was wrong." Miss Marple offered a small nod. "You came because you were frightened," she said. "Frightened of the person who changed your work." Nora looked at her with a trembling breath. "What do I do now?" Miss Marple answered gently. "You tell us everything. Every detail." Nora closed her eyes. She knew there was no turning back. And Miss Marple knew as well. The real mastermind manipulated everyone. Miss Marple sat at the small wooden table in the rehearsal room. The items lay before her in neat rows. Nothing dramatic. Nothing loud. Just quiet facts waiting to be connected. She picked up the handful of dark sand first. The same sand found under the pavilion. The same sand that had fallen into Lila's instrument case. Only one person moved confidently enough beneath that structure. Only one person knew the underside well. She set the sand aside. Then she reached for the broken lantern bulb. The corrosion still clung to the metal edge. The green tint matched the baton cap perfectly. The wires added to the bulb were not Nora's work. They required precision. Someone deliberate. Someone patient. She placed the bulb next to the microphone recorder. A small patch of dried moisture remained on the device. Salt moisture, not from the sea air. Salt water touched with metal filings. The exact mixture found inside the batten. A planned mixture, not an accident. Inspector Reeves stood nearby. He watched quietly as Miss Marple arranged everything. He did not interrupt. He had learned she needed the silence to think. Next, she lifted the photograph of the footprints. 2 sets. Adrian's heavy formal shoes, Victor's nautical shoes. Only one set returned. Victor's prints stopped at the switch-room door. They never came back. Someone else must have left by another route. Someone who knew how to avoid the tar path. Miss Marple lowered the photograph. She touched the edge thoughtfully. Victor had reason to be angry, reason to threaten, but threats and murder were very different things. She picked up the hidden message Helena found. The faint ink line had dried fully now. "Fix the first interval, or he won't finish the concert." Victor's handwriting. Yes, that part was clear, but the maestro did finish the first interval. He collapsed in the second. Someone had changed the timing. Someone who wanted the threat to mislead, not explain. Miss Marple arranged each clue in a slow pattern. Sand, bulb, moisture, footprints, message. Everything formed a simple chain. Nothing grand, nothing dramatic, just one steady line of logic. Nora's small sabotage had opened a door, but someone used it. Someone expanded it. Someone skilled enough to alter wiring without leaving signs. Someone calm enough to remain near the stage during the interval. Someone who had access to the baton. Someone trusted. Inspector Reeves stepped forward. "Do you have the answer, Miss Marple?" She gave a small nod. Her voice remained gentle. "Yes, Inspector. I believe I do." She looked toward the stage door. She had seen the Truth Building for hours. Every piece pointed in one direction. Every detail aligned with one person. The pattern was unmistakable now. Quiet, but unmistakable. She closed her hands softly around the metal shard she found under the pavilion. The final piece. Everything pointed to one man. The rehearsal room filled slowly. Chairs scraped softly. Faces tightened. No one spoke. Inspector Reeves stood near the door. Miss Marple stood near the small table where her clues lay neatly arranged. She waited until everyone had taken a seat. Adrian Colfax, Victor Halden, Nora Plimpton, Lila Travers, Mrs. Helena Brookfield. All of them sat with different versions of worry. Miss Marple gave a small nod. "Thank you for coming," she said gently. Her tone stayed calm. Calm enough to make silence deepen. She lifted the piece of dark sand first. "This," she said, "was found under the pavilion, the same sand that appeared in Lila's case, the same sand that marked the footsteps of the person who opened the baton during the interval." She placed it down. Then she lifted the broken lantern bulb. "The corrosion matches the baton cap," she continued. "It tells us someone altered both devices with the same mixture. Salt water, metal filings, a conductive solution." Nora lowered her head. "I only loosened one wire," she whispered. Miss Marple nodded kindly. "Yes, my dear, you created a small fault, but someone else expanded it. Someone who wanted far more than a simple disruption." She picked up the photo of the footprints next. Adrian's shoes and Victor's shoes entered the switch room, but only one set returned. Victor's did not. He left by another route. The tar path did not show his return. Victor shifted uneasily. "I only checked the wiring," he said. Miss Marple nodded again. "Yes, and you wrote a threat. A threat meant to frighten, not to kill." She held up the dried program. "The handwriting is yours. You asked for chaos in the first interval, but the maestro died in the second. Your timing never aligned with murder." Victor lowered his eyes. He looked exhausted, relieved even. Miss Marple now lifted the baton. The room grew still. "The end cap was forced back on," she said. A metal shard broke off under the pavilion. It shows someone rushed. Someone struggled with it. She turned the baton slightly so the light caught its edge. No one touched this during the first half. No one touched it after the collapse. It was opened and filled during the interval, in a place only one person knew well. Adrian stiffened. His jaw tightened. Miss Marple continued. "The maestro threatened to expose a financial irregularity," she said quietly. "He discovered a shortage in the restoration fund. A shortage you could not explain. A shortage he intended to report." Helena gasped softly. Lila covered her mouth. Nora stared at the floor. Miss Marple stepped closer. "The sabotage Nora created gave you the perfect cover," she said gently. "A loose wire, A brief distraction. People moving about. You slipped away. You crawled under the pavilion. You opened the baton. You prepared the device. Adrian rose from his chair. His voice cracked. That's absurd. Miss Marple raised a hand. Quiet. Steady. It is the only explanation that fits every detail, she said. Your shoes returned. Victor's did not. But the sand trail matched your final steps. You knew the structure. You had motive. You had opportunity. And you altered Nora's small fault into a deadly one. Inspector Reeves stepped forward. Adrian looked around wildly. Sweat gathered at his temple. Miss Marple spoke one last quiet line. Adrian still had one last lie to attempt. The village calmed slowly after the long night. People spoke in softer voices. No rush, no panic, just quiet relief. Lila stood near the steps of the pavilion, her shoulders finely loosened. She held her instrument gently, as if it had regained its place in her life. She whispered a small thank you to Miss Marple. Nora sat on a bench nearby, ashamed, tired, but grateful she had told the truth. Inspector Reeves assured her she would face consequences, but not the worst ones. She nodded quietly. A lesson learned. A heavy one. Miss Marple watched them both. She folded her hands and breathed softly. Human nature, she thought, was a mixture of hope and worry, honesty and fear. Ambition could push people to strange corners. Deception could grow quietly, like dust on forgotten shelves. She stepped away gently. Some secrets hide in harmless places until someone stirs them. Davis returns with a warm smile in his voice. He thanks everyone for joining tonight's Seaside Mystery. Then he asks, gently, which clue did you notice first? And where are you listening from tonight? He invites listeners to share their thoughts in the comments. He hints at tomorrow's story with a soft tease. A new puzzle waits, and it's closer than you think. And as always, he ends with, tomorrow, another kettle will boil.